Hi, my name is Danielle Celine Romanol, and I'm an independent dance anthropologist researcher. Okay, so today I will be doing a short presentation entitled The Children's Book Project, a new author's journey to writing and illustrating picture books. So I'm specifically focusing on writing and illustrating, which is the creative process for the material creation. So, and this is with a focus on the creation of my debut book, ta-da, Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat. Okay, so I wanted to show you this. So my book project started roughly 10 years ago, but technically it took about 9 years to finish only. So 9 years. So my goal for today is to share my writing and illustrating journey and to make it as concise as possible so that you don't have to go through 9 years of dilly-dallying like I did. Okay, so let's start. So everything starts with a big idea. So imagine this. You have a garden, or you want a garden, but before you can have a garden, you actually need a seed. So you can plant the seed and the seed becomes a flower or plant, and then you will ultimately have something. Then it will grow into the garden that you want. So writing, the beginning of writing is just like that. So like any endeavor, it starts with the story and the big idea behind it. So the idea is the skeletal structure in which your book is framed in, and this is the beginning of everything. So without it, there's just no movement from there. So like the comparison, like the point of reference that I mentioned a while back, the idea is like the seed that holds all the concepts that you want to share, which you plan to introduce to your readers. And in the case of my book, I had specific people in mind. So the lesson that I actually wanted to share was derived from the stories of these people, and I wanted their stories to be heard. My character, Harriet Pat, which you can see on the screen, was inspired by real people who selflessly helped others but have forgotten about themselves. So for others, these real life Harriet Pats were heroes, but I didn't just want to limit the coverage about these heroes. I wanted to share their stories, and by doing so, I wanted readers to know the value behind knowing such stories and inspire them to realize that anyone can be a hero. And they can do so by harnessing their own uniqueness, thereby also injecting the topic of diversity and independence. Because the best feature of children's literature is that you get to play and convert big and heavy topics using the lens of a child, and then they become more relatable. So your readers become more receptive to what you are trying to relate, to all the messages that is being relayed in the story. And the reason why I wanted to dive into these kinds of topics for such young readers, because some people would comment that, oh, you're tackling too much, too big of a topic. But I think that children are more perceptive than what we give them credit for, should be introduced to these kinds of topics early on. But this is just my take on the matter, and other people might have a different opinion on it. So once your idea is set, you can then move to structuring the narrative or start making or working on the story. And here are some points that I considered when I was writing Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat. So my advice is to take these points in consideration at the onset, as it helps mold your story and align everything within your focus at the earliest stage possible, which I did not immediately do because I was clueless. Honestly, I didn't know where to go, and I was just groping around. So I was moving from one element to another and then going back. So basically wasting time. And maybe that, well, that is the reason why it took me 9 years to finish the whole creation. But the first element to consider in knowing, in writing your story is knowing your target reading age. How you will tell your story is dependent on who you are writing it for. So you have to ask yourself, what age range are you considering? So if you're considering of writing a picture book, do you already have an age range in mind? Knowing the age category can help you structure the other elements of your book, which you can see here in this slide. And like the length of your story, as you can see, vocabulary, point of view, the words that you will use, the manner that you want the story to be narrated, the characters and the setting. So for example, if you want to, let's say, write a story for 4 to 7 year old children, then you have to pay attention to the preferences and limitations of this age range. To make your book appealing to them, 4 to 7 year old children, then you need to limit, let's say, the number of words to young readers, 300 to 400 words, or maybe you can extend it to 500. Or you might also need to choose words that 4 to 7 year olds are familiar with. Use vibrant and saturated illustrations and colors because they are attracted to these. Create characters that are interesting to them and use text fonts that that they can actually identify. Now, I want to add something about the text fonts because one of the things that I really paid attention to with the layout of my book was I wanted to specifically use Comic Sans for my text fonts. And in the beginning, there were some remarks about my choice of font by digital and graphic artists. And I understand why they would react that way because most of them would be catering to an adult audience. But for me, since my book was for children, I wanted to make sure that the letters that they see on the book are the letters that they know in school. Because I remembered when I was teaching young learners, for example, as you can see here, letter A, that's not how we were taught in the beginning. That's not the kind of A that they know. So I wanted to use a font in which shows all the letters that a young learner actually can identify. So that's why, so I have to justify that choice in terms of font. But take note though that setting a target reading age is for me only, merely a guide, or it can be an important suggestion. You have an option to follow the preferences and limitations of your target category, but you are not restricted within that range. So in my case, I initially started with the age range of 5 to 9, but expanded it because I also thought about other reading scenarios. So it's not all the time that the child is reading alone, but most often the child is being read to by an adult reader or is reading with an older reader. So I did not want to alienate these older readers while they were reading my book as well. So I also included them as my target. So from 5 to 9, it's sort of extended. And when I think about reading scenarios, I think about moms reading to their infants, aunties reading to their niece or nephew, siblings reading together, or grandma reading to grandchildren, and maybe also teachers conducting reading out loud sessions in school. So those are other reading scenarios that actually can involve a picture book. Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat is generally designed for children, but it is also made relatable to adult readers. I was not merely reaching out to children, but to older readers. And I wanted these older readers to be able to reflect on the story. After all, the book took inspiration from experiences of older individuals. So what I'm trying to say is it's good to have a focus as it gives your story that much needed structure. But I think any creative person would suggest that you also try playing and expanding the borders of your category and exploring its possibilities, because you never really know unless you experiment and take the risk. So this is what I did with my first book, but remember that I am only speaking for myself and my experience. Other authors might have a different experience. So going through the points, again, the ones that you can see here in the slide, once you have your target reading age in mind, it will be easier to go to the next elements that you see. So the next element is the length of your story. And it's about the number of words that you will use, as well as the total number of illustrations that you will include in your book. So the older the readers, the longer the story. Important note, attention span. And then vocabulary points to the kind of words that you will use. Like what I said, you can play with the elements, as it is always a matter of striking the right balance. In Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat, there were words that were uncommon, but I was determined to introduce them in the story. And these became new words for younger readers to learn or be oriented to, because I wanted them to take something new from their reading experience of my book. So let's use the names in my book as an example. I used the names that were common in their respective regions. For example, Milanovic, Milanovic. So it's a fairly common Eastern European name, and Europeans may know how to say the name exactly like how I am saying it now. But if you go to Asia, this comes as a unique name, and readers from Asian regions may find it a challenge to read. They don't often stumble into these kinds of names, and their orientation to the phonetics of the letters would be different. For example, from that, the letter C, I have always been used to articulating the letter C as k or s, right, for the sounds. But the moment I got here in Serbia, there are different variations for the phonetics for the letter C. And in this case, here you say it as Milanovic, but if I didn't have that kind of orientation, I would have said as Milanovic or Milanovic, something like that. However, and the good thing about it is, if someone is introduced to something, they become curious about it, right? So they start sort of wonder, oh, that's actually different from what I know. This becomes a window of opportunity for curiosity to pave the way for new knowledge. So maybe after being introduced to the name, the reader will start wondering or asking where the name came from, what the people there are like, what language do they use, and so on. So they become curious, they start asking questions, and then they get to learn more about different places and culture. So again, possibilities are endless, and sometimes you just need to open one window. But pay attention that you always have to strike the right balance. You want to introduce new words, but you don't want to overwhelm the readers also. Okay, next part would be point of view. And point of view refers to the perspective of the writer. You will need to make a decision from the beginning. So this is something that you need to do when you're creating your material, to make decisions at the very beginning, at the earliest stage possible. So what person or time are you using here? Will you be writing in first person, such as using me or I, where it gives the impression that the story is happening to you? Will you be using second person, where you use you or your, where you are placing the reader in the story and he or she will feel involved? Or will you be using a third person, which is he, she, they, where both you and the reader are outside the story, in which you may have more reign in writing the thoughts and feelings of every character in the book, because then you are writing at the point of view of an outsider looking in. So your choice for perspective goes hand in hand with your choice of time, referring to tenses. Will you be narrating the story in present or past? I chose to narrate the story in present tense because it gives that feeling that the readers can still do something, since the events appeared to be current or are still ongoing, as opposed to past tense, which would then give the impression that the events have already happened and does not encourage the readers to make decisions because the decisions has been made for them. Although in a book, in every book, the decisions are already settled. But while the reading, the act of reading, the book, it will sort of encourage that kind of reaction. So, but please remember that one choice is not better than the other, but you have to make a decision based on what you want to accomplish and maintain the usage from start to beginning so there is consistency. And then you also need to consider the element of how you are going to write your story. Is it traditional storytelling, full sentences narrated in progressive order? Will you be using repetitions? Because repetitions are actually quite useful for really young readers because you're introducing vocabularies repeatedly, and it helps them in retention. Or will you be using rhymes, which was what I did with my book? I used rhyming because I was fond of rhymes. I love rhymes when I was younger, so I thought I would use something which was interesting to me. Also, when I was teaching before, I observed that my young students enjoyed and were drawn to reading materials that used rhymes. So that was mainly my justification for using rhyming in the manner of writing my story. And then finally, there are characters and setting where most of the fun happen. So you have full artistic rights to create engaging characters and environments. So, but if it's fantasy, then by all means, knock yourself out by creating the most out of the ordinary characters or setting. But my advice when creating your characters is to not just think about the names or how they physically look, but to also think about their backstories. Every character that you will introduce in your book, there has to be a backstory, like their motivation, struggles, strengths, weaknesses, and origins. Bear in mind that all these aspects go hand in hand and help you mold and position each one, that when you put them all together, it all makes sense and the readers can follow. So yeah, so this is, and then on the next slide, I wanted to show you, um, a book trailer of Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat so that you can have an idea of what Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat is. However, due to technical difficulties, we will still run this video, but after I'm done with the presentation, and it will be done by Mia. Okay, so let me just move along and focus. So, and then later I can show you the book trailers, because the book trailer is actually quite helpful when you're doing promotions. And people are attracted to short videos, and it's good because you sort of give them a taste of what you just did. And I encourage you to actually make book trailers when you've started promotion for your books. But let's go ahead and continue. Okay. So remember what I said a while back about backstories of the characters that you are going to create. So you think about the motivations, the struggles, strengths, weaknesses, origins, and so forth. These are especially useful when you start your illustrations. So your illustrations should show your story, And here are some questions that can actually help you in this part of the process. So ask yourself again. So you have to always ask yourself a lot of questions during the creative process. What style do you want for your book? Do you have specific styles in mind that you find inspiring? So some will advise that you look at new books so you will have an idea of ongoing trends, or maybe check out other picture books. But you can always play to your own strengths or preference instead of going mainstream. And how do you want your illustrations done? So think, what material or what tool are you going to use? Do you want charcoal, ink, pen? For example, Shel Silverstein, my favorite writer, and he uses only monochromatic illustrations. So that's ink, and it's amazing. I love his work. Or you can also use watercolor, color pencils, craypas, graphic, or digital art. You have so many choices. So if you go for traditional publishing, you don't often have to worry about this part, the illustration part, because the publishing house will make the decisions for you. All you need to think about in these kinds of arrangements is your manuscript. But wouldn't it be great to actually have a say on the illustration part? So, although for some, this might not be a good idea, as writers and illustrators don't often get along in terms of creativity. And this is why publishing houses like to make the writing part independent from the illustrating part. But there are some writers who contribute to illustrating, or there are some who both write and illustrate their books. So, which is what I will be doing for my next book. Because in Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat, I'm getting the book, I wrote and created the draft sketches. And then these sketches were polished by Andre Nervida. So he was the illustrator that I worked with. So I only gave him my draft sketches, and then he polished it. And that's why Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat looks like this now. In fact, if you want to see the story of how she was illustrated, I actually created a video of her in my Facebook page, The Book Den. And if you want to get hold of Andre Nervida, you want to collaborate with him, you can find him and his works in Instagram. If you need his email, I can also share that. So just send me a private message. So, but on my next book, I will be doing the illustrations from start to finish. And here's the thing, when I was comparing the works here and my next book, the artistic direction of my next book is different from Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat. So, but if you are not illustrating and you want to contribute to the output, it really helps to prepare a brief for your illustrator. As you can see there, the brief is like a concept note, and it includes a summary of the story, description of the characters. This is if you are conceptualizing the illustration. If you are not, then you can offer suggestions, but give full rein to the illustrator and not waste his or her time playing with possibilities or changing your mind every now and then, unless you can afford it. So I say this because there are some writers who are not certain about what they want or what their concepts are, and they constantly insist ideas that they are entertaining and then changing their minds. So while the illustrations, and this is while illustrations are being done. So if this happens, you will not only get into each other's nerves, but you will also be wasting time. So in this brief, you also need to include the book orientation and size. So for example, think about how you want the book to look like. Do you want it in, let's say, in portrait or landscape orientation? How big or how small is it? As these give the illustrator an idea on how to set or present the drawing. So you like try to imagine a reading scenario, because then you will have an idea on how you want your book to look. So with Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat, I'm looking at my book right now, I originally wanted Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat in landscape orientation. So this one is not landscape. This is portrait. And this, I wasn't too keen on the 8.5 by 11 portrait size, which is what it is now. And I did not want it to be taller. I wanted it to be wider, like that. So originally that was what I planned to do. However, after all the illustrations were approved and layout work was being done, there were pages that looked odd or cramped, and so there was a need to readjust and resize the orientation, which eventually led to the book's final look. And I admit it does look better like this. So yes, I guess it was a good idea to actually decide on a taller orientation rather than a wider one. But again, this is my choice, and you can decide for yourself. And then also in your brief, you can add the work timeline, the number of pages for the illustration, because they would want to know how many sketches or drawings they will need to fulfill, what kind of files you want them saved in, your budget, and rights arrangement. So basically, the brief will show your illustrator what he or she is signing up to and will set expectations. And here are some examples of the illustrations from my book. So illustration 2 and 3 are examples of the original works submitted to me by Andre Nervita. And while illustration number 1 here is an edited and resized illustration. So this particular illustration was altered mainly to accommodate the text, because you also need to make sure in your layout that the illustration does not overwhelm the text, or else you would be in the danger of losing your story. So you also need to make sure that the page is not too busy with so many things happening, because sometimes it can be too much and it discourages the reader from reading. So these are examples of the illustrations that you will find in my book. And then, of course, lastly, during your creative or your creation process, you have the feedback. So review and get feedback from your publishing house, editor, another writer, art director, your friends and family, or other possible readers. It is important to have another set of eyes that can take a look at what you have done, so that, because these insights can be used constructively, and this will go a long way once you start your publishing and promotions. So feedback is necessary, and it's a continuous undertaking. Up until now, in my page, the book then, I always encourage the readers to, I always say there, if you have my book and you've read it, I would be very grateful if you provide me with your insight. So if you can, send me a direct message. And a lot of people would send photos, and then they would also give me their comments about the book, how their children reacted to it. So it's really very helpful in that sense, that it helps you improve your material if you're going to do revisions later, or you're going to do other versions of the same book later on. Or if not, then it also improves your processes, the ones that you actually do in creating your materials. So take it seriously, but do not beat yourself down, because maybe you might receive comments that you will think are offensive or are too negative. Every comment is positive. Every comment is constructive, because even the ones that we perceive as negative can still help us one way or another. So it's all part of the creation process. And then once you are ready or confident with your material, I think it's really very important that you are certain and sure and proud and confident about your work before you actually pitch it to a literary agent or to a publishing house. So that's why the focus of this presentation is all about the creation of the material. You can then proceed to the next steps, which is getting it published. And that's an entirely new topic. So that is it for my presentation today. And I hope you found the presentation helpful. And if you want to read Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat, it is available for purchase at Central Books, Shopee, Lazada, and Amazon. And you also have some of my details here. This is where I post most of the book's videos. And if you want to see my artworks, you can go to my Instagram, which is Den Ramanal Art. Or if you want to see the book then, which is the page that I maintain for the works that I do, I have entries about, because some readers would actually send their photos. Okay, this is the newest video of a young reader, and she was talking about the book, Harriet, Pat, and Her Hat. This is a photo sent by another reader, a customer who bought Harriet, Pat, and you can see the location where it is now, because I was also curious where the book was going. So it's been to different places in the Philippines, and I'm very happy that it has. So this one's in Cebu. Oh, and you will also see links to my other works here, this is my research works. And here is another customer, and she bought 4 copies of Harriet, Pat, and because she bought it for her because she was a ninang, so for her godchildren. And then this one is from Cebu. And then, of course, it's interesting to actually see where the book has gone, and to hear how these readers are actually responding or reacting to my book. So now, just so you will have an idea of what the book is all about, and to give you an idea of the story of Harriet Pat, Mayan is going to run a video of the book trailer that I created when I first promoted the book.
There's a girl who has a one-of-a-kind hat, and townsfolk call her Hattie Harriet Pat. Everyone waits for Harriet Pat to come by, for every townsfolk believe that her hat answers every cry. Off she goes to help them hither and yon. Day in, day out, her hours have gone. This cannot go on, she said one night. This has to change by hook or by bite. What will Harriet Pat do? Harriet Pat and Her Hat, a new rhyming picture book from Danielle Celine Romanel. Illustrations by Andre Nervita. Get your copies now.
That is it for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you will all stay safe and healthy during this challenging period. Maayong adlaw kaninyong tanan.